The bark of the old oak tree was weathered and gray, scarred by 15 winters. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could still see them. 2 sets of initials carved deep into the wood. IH plus AV. At 16, he'd carved those letters with a pocket knife while she laughed and told him they'd get in trouble. At 32, he came back to see if they were still there. But the woman he'd carved them for had spent 15 years learning to forget him. This is the story of what happens when first love gets a second chance. But the world won't let it survive. Before we begin, I want you to know something. Drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from? And have you ever lost someone you thought was the one? Hit that like button if you believe some people are worth waiting for. Because in the next 30 minutes, you're going to witness a love story that defies every odd. This is the story of Isabella and Alexander, 2 teenagers torn apart by family, class, and cruel timing. What you're about to hear isn't just about love. It's about the promises we make when we're young, the pain of growing up without the person who understood us most, and what happens when destiny gives you one impossible second chance. By the end, you'll understand why some loves never die. They just wait. Summer 1994. Isabella Hartley was 16 when she fell in love with the wrong boy. Her family's estate sprawled across 40 acres of old money and older traditions. Manicured gardens, a household staff, and her father, Richard Hartley, who ran his home like a fortress. Isabella was the daughter he intended to marry off to the right family from the right background. But Isabella didn't want a boy from the country club. She wanted Alexander Vale. That evening in late July, Isabella slipped through the hedge maze as the sun painted the sky gold and pink. She wore her favorite sundress, the yellow one her mother said was too casual, and her heart hammered against her ribs, half fear of getting caught, half anticipation of seeing him. Alexander was waiting by the ancient oak tree, hands shoved in his worn Levi's. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and his whole face changed. That smile, the one he saved just for her. "You came," he said softly. "I'll always come," she whispered back. Alexander was the son of the estate's former groundskeeper. His father had been let go 5 years earlier under accusations of theft, accusations that were never proven but never forgotten. In their small Connecticut town, that kind of thing stuck to a family like tar. For one perfect summer, they built a world no one could touch. Every evening they'd meet by that oak tree. He'd bring wildflowers he'd picked from the roadside, black-eyed Susan's, Queen Anne's lace. She'd bring stories about the life she wanted, one far from her father's control, far from the suffocating expectations of junior league luncheons and debutante balls. They'd lie in the grass counting stars, listening to his portable CD player, counting crows, the cranberries, songs about longing and forever. They'd make plans that felt inevitable. One night in August, Alexander pulled out his Swiss Army knife. "What are you doing?" Isabella asked, propping herself up on her elbow. "Making sure," he said, carefully carving their initials into the bark. "No matter what happens, this will still be here." Proof that this was real. She traced the letters with her fingertip. IH plus AV. "Forever," he promised. But every forbidden love has an expiration date. It came on a Thursday in late August, 2 weeks before school started. Isabella and Alexander were by the oak tree. his Letterman jacket draped over her shoulders even though it was still warm. His arm around her, her head on his chest when a voice cut through the twilight like ice. "Get off my property." Richard Hartley stood 20 feet away, still in his business suit from the office, his face carved from stone and fury. Alexander scrambled to his feet. Isabella's blood turned cold. "Dad, please." "Be quiet, Isabella." Her father's voice was deadly calm. He turned to Alexander. "You have 30 seconds to leave before I call the police." "Sir, I love your daughter." 25 seconds. Alexander looked at Isabella, his eyes desperate, pleading. She reached for him, but her father stepped between them. "Don't make this worse," Richard said quietly. "Not for her. Not for your mother." That last part made Alexander freeze. His mother worked as a secretary at the hospital, barely making ends meet after his father lost his job. Alexander's jaw clenched. Then he turned and walked away, fists tight at his sides. But Richard Hartley didn't just separate them. Over the next 3 days, he made phone calls. He was on the board at Yale, knew people at every decent college in the Northeast. He made sure that Alexander Vale's scholarship applications would face complications. That letters of recommendation would be delayed or lost. That doors would close before Alexander even knew they were there. 3 nights later, pebbles hit Isabella's window just after midnight. She rushed to open it, and there he was. Alexander in the garden below, his father's old duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "I have to go," he said urgently, keeping his voice low. "Your father, he's making it impossible for me to stay. My mom's boss called her in today, said there might be restructuring. We both know what that means." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. "Where will you go?" "I've got an uncle in Colorado, construction work. It's not much, but it's a start." He looked up at her, his face anguished. "I'm coming back for you, Bella, I promise. Wait for me, please." "How long?" "However long it takes to become someone your father can't push around." They pressed their hands against opposite sides of the window glass, hearts breaking in unison. He left before dawn. No goodbye to anyone else, just gone, and Isabella waited. Year 1, 1995. She wrote him letters she never sent, tucked them in a shoebox under her bed, kept his junior prom photo in her locker. Turned down every boy who asked her out, no matter how popular or how persistent. Her girlfriends thought she was crazy. "He's not coming back," they'd say over Diet Cokes at the diner. "You need to move on." But she couldn't. Year 3, 1997. She went to Boston University, made new friends, joined the art history club, still checked her mailbox every single day hoping for a letter, even though she knew he didn't have her dorm address. She kept a pager, then eventually got one of those new cell phones, the chunky Nokia everyone was getting just in case he tried to reach her. He never did. Year 7, 2001. The world changed that September. And in the aftermath, when everyone was holding their loved ones closer, Isabella found herself dating Marcus, a kind lawyer from a good family, someone her father approved of. When Marcus proposed at Christmas, presenting a diamond ring over dinner at the Four Seasons, Isabella stared at it and felt nothing but emptiness. She said no, because he wasn't Alexander. Year 10, 2004. She stopped going back to the oak tree when she visited home for the holidays. Stopped wearing the locket with Alexander's photo. stopped checking the phone book in different cities hoping to find his name. She tried to convince herself she'd imagined how deeply they'd connected. Maybe it was just teenage drama. Maybe she'd built it up in her head like one of those CW shows everyone was watching. Year 15, 2009. Isabella Hartley was 31, a successful art curator at a gallery in Boston. Beautiful, accomplished, living in a renovated brownstone with exposed brick and hardwood floors, and completely convinced she'd wasted half her life waiting for a ghost. One rainy November evening, she pulled out an old shoebox from her closet. Inside was a faded photo, her and Alexander at 16, his arm around her, both of them laughing at something long forgotten. There was his Letterman jacket patch, a dried wildflower, ticket stubs from movies they'd seen. She stared at the photo for a long moment. Then she put it in the back of a drawer and closed it. She finally let go, which is, of course, exactly when Alexander came back. Here's what most people don't understand about first love. It's not about perfection. It's not even about the other person. It's about who you were when you believed love could conquer anything. Isabella at 16 believed in grand gestures and destiny. She believed that if you loved someone enough, if you held on tight enough, the universe would conspire to bring you together. She believed in the kind of love they showed in movies, the kind that transcended time and distance. Isabella at 31 had learned that love means compromise, timing, and luck. She'd learned that sometimes love isn't enough, that the world has a way of grinding down even the purest feelings. She'd built walls so high, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be unguarded. Meanwhile, 500 miles away in Denver, Alexander had spent 15 years becoming someone Isabella's father couldn't dismiss. He'd worked construction for 2 years, back-breaking work that left his hands calloused and his back aching. He'd taken night classes at community college, then transferred to the University of Colorado. Studied architecture while working 40-hour weeks. Graduated with honors, but no connections, no family name to open doors. He'd worked under firms that treated him like the help because he needed the experience. Learned every aspect of the business. Saved every penny he could. 5 years ago, he'd started his own firm, Vale and Associates. Small projects at first, then bigger ones. A renovation downtown, a community center, a library that won a regional award. Every building he designed, every contract he won. Every time someone called him Mr. Vale with respect. He was doing it for one reason. So he could walk back into Isabella's life and not be the groundskeeper's son anymore. But here's the truth he carried every single day. None of it meant anything if she'd moved on. If she'd married someone else. If she'd forgotten him. So when the cream-colored invitation arrived at his office, embossed, formal, expensive paper, his hands trembled as he held it. The Hartley Foundation Annual Gala. You are cordially invited. He knew it was time to find out if 15 years was too long, or exactly long enough. September 2009. The Hartley estate hadn't changed. The same iron gates with the family crest, the same winding driveway lined with old oaks, the same enormous colonial house with too many windows and too much history. But everything else had. Isabella stood in the grand ballroom in an emerald gown, understated elegance, nothing flashy. She greeted guests with practiced grace, the way she'd been trained since childhood. Air kisses, firm handshakes, remembering names and asking about grandchildren. She'd avoided this place for 5 years. But her mother's charity, supporting local schools, something that actually mattered, was important. And she'd finally convinced herself the ghosts were gone. Alexander walked in at 8:47 p.m. He'd timed it carefully, late enough to blend into the crowd, early enough that she'd still be there. He wore a tailored navy suit, Brooks Brothers, perfectly fitted. His hair was shorter now, more refined, touched with just a hint of gray at the temples. His shoulders broader from years of physical labor before success. But his eyes, those hazel green eyes, were exactly the same. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and scanned the room. And then he saw her. Isabella was laughing at something an elderly donor was saying, champagne flute in hand, pearl earrings catching the chandelier light. She looked effortlessly elegant and completely untouchable. As if she felt his gaze burning into her, she turned. Their eyes met across a room of 200 people. Time stopped. Isabella's champagne glass slipped slightly in her hand. She steadied it, but her heart was racing so fast she thought everyone must hear it pounding. It couldn't be, but it was. Alexander moved through the crowd, pardon me, never breaking eye contact. The noise of the party faded. The string quartet, the laughter, the clinking glasses, all of it became distant static. He stopped 3 feet away. "Hello, Isabella." His voice, deeper now, roughened by time, but unmistakable. "Alex." The name came out barely above a whisper. 2 words. 15 years of silence shattered. They stepped outside to the garden. Neither of them suggested it. They just moved in unison like their bodies remembered what their minds had tried to forget. The September night was cool, crickets chirping in the hedgerows. The oak tree was still there, illuminated by the glow from the house. Older, scarred by weather and time, just like them. Isabella wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite her pashmina. Why now? 15 years, Alex, 15. Alexander kept his distance, though every part of him wanted to close it. Because I promised I'd come back when I was someone worthy of you. When your father couldn't say I was beneath your family. You were never beneath us. Your father thought differently. Alexander's jaw tightened. And maybe he was right. I had nothing, Bella. No degree, no prospects, no future, just anger and stubbornness and a beat-up truck. So you left. So I left. He took a breath, the words he'd rehearsed for years suddenly difficult. I worked construction in Denver for 2 years, framing houses, pouring foundations, went to community college at night. My hands were so torn up from work I could barely hold a pencil to take notes. Isabella's eyes glistened with unshed tears in the moonlight. I transferred to CU Boulder, got my architecture degree, worked under firms that treated me like I was still that groundskeeper's kid because I needed the experience, needed the connections. His voice was raw now, all pretense stripped away. Started my own company 5 years ago, Vale and Associates. We just finished a library in Boulder that won a design award. He pulled out his wallet, showed her a business card. Proof that he'd become real, substantial. Every building I designed, Alexander continued, every contract I won, every time someone called me Mr. Vale with respect instead of that tone people use when they think you're nobody. I was doing it for one reason. So I could walk back into your life and not be that scared kid your father threw off his property. A tear slipped down Isabella's cheek, catching the light. I waited, Alex. God, I waited. I turned down proposals, 2 of them. I pushed away good men who could have made me happy. I spent birthdays and Thanksgivings and New Year's Eves alone because none of them were you. Her voice broke. I kept your jacket. It's still in my closet in Boston. I kept everything. Bella. And then I stopped, she said, her voice barely holding together. I turned 30 and decided I couldn't keep living in the past. I let you go. Alexander stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and adult, nothing like the Drakkar Noir he wore at 16. I know. And I'm not asking you to go back to who we were. Those kids don't exist anymore. I'm asking if you'll let me meet who you've become. The space between them felt electric, dangerous, full of 15 years of longing and loss and what-ifs. Isabella looked up at him, and for a moment it seemed like everything would be okay. And just when everything seemed possible, there you are, darling. A woman's voice, smooth as silk and sharp as glass. Victoria Ashford appeared from the terrace, stunning in a black cocktail dress, her hand immediately and possessively on Alexander's arm. She wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. They're asking for you inside. The mayor wants to discuss the waterfront project. Isabella's face transformed in an instant, walls slamming back up, expression going cold and distant. She recognized this. The corporate wife, the business partner, the woman who belonged in Alexander's world now. Of course, Alexander said tightly, his jaw clenched. Victoria, this is... But Isabella was already walking away, her heels clicking on the stone path. Excuse me, she said to no one in particular, disappearing into the crowd. Isabella didn't wait for explanations. She couldn't breathe in that garden, couldn't think with him standing so close, smelling like expensive cologne and success and everything she'd dreamed he'd become. She made polite excuses, left the gala early, and drove back to Boston that night. 3 hours in the dark, radio off, just her and the highway and the crushing weight of 15 years crashing down. For the next 3 days, her cell phone buzzed with calls from a Colorado number. She ignored everyone. The rumors spread like wildfire through their small hometown's social circle, the kind of gossip that travels through country club luncheons and junior league meetings and alumni gatherings. Alexander Vale and Victoria Ashford, business partners turned romantic partners, engaged, some said, living together in Denver, planning a spring wedding. Isabella told herself it was better this way. He'd moved on, built a life, found someone from his world, someone who understood architecture and business deals and the person he'd become. She should be happy for him. She wasn't. On the 4th night at nearly midnight, her doorbell rang in Boston. She almost didn't answer. It was late. She was in her pajamas, flannel pants, and an old BU sweatshirt, and she had work in the morning. But something made her look through the peephole. Alexander stood there, soaking wet from the rain, still in his suit but disheveled, eyes desperate. She opened the door. "Victoria and I are business partners," he said immediately, breathlessly, like he'd been practicing this speech the whole drive from Connecticut. He held up his BlackBerry, showing her documents on the tiny screen. That's it. The engagement rumor started because she wanted it to be true. She made assumptions, started telling people, and I shut it down 3 months ago. These are the dissolution papers. She's buying out my share of the firm. I'm starting over. Read them. Isabella's hand shook as she took the phone, squinting at the small text, rain dripping onto the screen. "I didn't spend 15 years becoming someone you could love," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Just to love someone else." The rain pounded the sidewalk behind him. Water dripped from his hair onto his collar, his $1,000 suit probably ruined. Isabella handed back his phone. Her voice came out small, young, like the 16-year-old girl who'd waited by the window. "Why didn't you call? Not once, Alex. 15 years and not a single phone call. Not a letter. Not even an email." Alexander's face crumpled, all his success and polish stripped away. "Because your father made me promise. The day I left, he found me at the Greyhound station downtown. Said if I ever contacted you, letters, phone calls, emails, anything, he'd make sure my mother lost her job at the hospital. She was already dealing with my dad's drinking, barely keeping us afloat." Isabella felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What?" He said he'd make one phone call and she'd be fired. No severance, no references, nothing. "You know how this town works, Bella. You know his reach." Alexander's voice was raw with pain and old rage. "So I waited. I worked and I saved and I built something until I had enough power, enough money, enough connections that his threats meant nothing. Until I could protect everyone I loved." He looked at her, really looked at her, like he could see straight through to her soul. "Including you." Her father had controlled them both. For 15 years, manipulated their lives like pieces on a chessboard, all to maintain his vision of what Isabella's life should be. Isabella stepped forward, rain now hitting her too as she stood in the doorway of her brownstone. She reached up with both hands and took Alexander's face, his skin cold and wet from the rain. "I'm so tired of other people deciding our story," she whispered. Alexander's hands covered hers, his touch gentle despite the desperation in his eyes. "Then let's write a new one." They kissed, not like teenagers drunk on first love and summer nights, but like survivors finding home after a long, brutal war. Like people who'd been hollowed out and filled with longing and had finally found their way back. If this story is hitting you right in the heart, do me a favor. Share this with someone who needs to believe love can survive anything. Comment and tell me, would you wait 15 years? Have you ever had to let go of someone you thought was your person? And make sure you're subscribed, because the ending will remind you why some people are worth every painful, lonely moment. Now let's see how they finally got there forever. They didn't run away together that night. They didn't do the romantic, impulsive thing. They did something harder. They faced her father. Together. 2 weeks later, Isabella called a family dinner at the estate. Her mother, confused but hopeful, set the dining room table with the good china. Her father arrived home from the office at 6:30 like always and stopped dead when he saw Alexander sitting in the living room. "What is this?" Richard asked, his voice controlled but cold. "This is a conversation we should have had 15 years ago," Isabella said calmly. She stood next to Alexander, their shoulders touching. "Alexander is part of my life now. I'm telling you this as a courtesy, Dad, not asking for permission." The dinner was tense. Her mother tried to make small talk about the weather, about the charity gala, about anything to fill the terrible silences. Finally, Richard set down his fork with a deliberate clink. "I was protecting you, Isabella. You were controlling me, she replied, her voice steady in a way it never had been at 16. There's a difference. Alexander had barely touched his food. Now he looked directly at Richard Hartley, the man who'd once made him feel like nothing, who'd wielded power like a weapon. "I'm not asking for your blessing, Mr. Hartley," Alexander said quietly. "I'm not that kid you threw off your property anymore. I'm informing you that I'm part of her life now. You can accept that or not, but I'm not leaving again." The two men held eye contact. Richard, the man who'd once held all the power, all the cards, and Alexander, the boy who'd grown into someone who could stand his ground. Richard looked away first. He didn't apologize. Men like Richard Hartley, men of his generation and his class, rarely do. But he nodded. Once, sharp and brief. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't acceptance, not really, but it was enough. 6 months later, Alexander and Isabella didn't move into the estate. They didn't need the approval of that world, that life. Alexander designed a house, not a mansion, not a statement. A home, simple and modern, with clean lines and lots of windows tucked at the edge of town where the old money ended and the real world began. It took 8 months to build. Isabella would drive up from Boston on weekends to watch its progress. They'd walk the property, planning where the garden would go, where they'd have coffee in the mornings. Every morning now, Isabella woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows. Alexander would already be outside, tending the garden he was growing from scratch, tomatoes, herbs. Those same wildflowers he used to bring her at 16. She'd make coffee in the kitchen, a real percolator, not the fancy espresso machine her mother kept suggesting they needed, and bring him a cup in his favorite mug. They'd sit on the back porch in the Adirondack chairs he'd built, shoulders touching, watching the world wake up. Some mornings they'd talk. Some mornings they'd just sit in comfortable silence. One morning in early spring, Isabella said softly, "I used to think love was about being chosen first, about being someone's only choice, their destiny, like in the movies we watched as kids." Alexander kissed the top of her head, his arm around her shoulders. "And now I know it's about being chosen again," she said, looking out at the garden, at the life they'd built. "After the magic fades, after you've both been hurt, after life has given you 1,000 reasons to walk away and protect yourself." Alexander took her hand, the one with the simple gold band he'd placed there 3 months ago at the courthouse, with just her mother and his as witnesses. "Nothing fancy, nothing to prove. And I'll choose you every day," he said. "Always." Above their door, Alexander had carved words into the wooden frame, no different than the initials on that old oak tree, but deeper, more permanent. IH plus AV, 1994 and 2009. Worth the wait. On their 1-year anniversary of that rainy reunion in Boston, they went back to the estate garden one last time. The old oak tree stood silent and strong, just as it had for probably 100 years. The initials they'd carved at 16 were barely visible now, weathered almost smooth by wind and rain and time. Isabella placed her hand on the rough bark, feeling the ghost of those letters beneath her palm. Alexander covered her hand with his. The tree survived storms and seasons and 15 years of silence, Isabella said softly. "Just like us," Alexander replied. They stood there for a long moment, honoring the teenagers they'd been. Those kids who'd believed love could conquer anything and had been proven both wrong and right. Then they turned and walked away together, hand in hand, back to their car, back to their house, back to the life they'd built with their own hands. Because some promises aren't measured in time, they're measured in truth. And some loves don't die. They just wait for you to become the person who can keep them. If you believe some people are worth waiting for, drop a comment with a heart. Share this story with someone who needs to believe that true love can survive anything, even time, even distance, even the people who try to keep you apart. And subscribe, because these are the stories that remind us why love is still the most powerful force on earth. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next story.